what is freedom of speech? It's the freedom to speak. So I read a politician today saying, I agree with freedom of speech, but there are limits. Well, there's no freedom of speech then. Freedom of speech is the freedom to speak. If anyone's not allowed to speak, then it's not freedom of speech, it's freedom to conform to certain parameters of what are acceptable. And then what that's doing is giving power to some authority to decide what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And as we see, and we're seeing it massively now, once you give that power to an authority, it then starts interpreting what can and cannot be said in a way that squeezes and squeezes and squeezes more and more of what cannot be said. This is what political correctness is about. What is political correctness? It's simply manipulating the target population to silence itself, so those in authority don't have to. It's ridiculous. Now, people say, well, you say that people can say anything. Well, yes, I do, and I'll tell you why. There are laws against incitement to racism, incitement to hatred, incitement to violence. There are laws against that.
Are they laws you agree with?
Yeah, and if people use their freedom of speech to incite those things, then there are laws to deal with that, and those laws should deal with it. What I'm saying is, once you start censoring freedom of speech at the point of delivery, or even more sinister, before the point of delivery, by banning people from the right to have access to the communication networks or speak in public, that is what the fascists do. What did fascists do in Nazi Germany? What does any tyranny do? It wants to silence those that are exposing the tyranny and have a different version of events to the tyranny. So what did the Nazis do? They burnt the books. They banned the meetings of people who were exposing the Nazis. And now in this inverted world, we have people who call themselves progressives, and they seem to have this extraordinary self-delusion that progressive mentality has something to do with being liberal, when it's not. It's the opposite of liberal. They are the ones that claim to be wanting people to be inclusive and to have diversity.
But maybe on their terms.
When they're destroying diversity, and they have become the new tyranny. They have become the new Nazis. What I'm saying here is, if you look at what this progressive mentality is doing in silencing people and deciding in their arrogance what people can and cannot say and what opinion they can and cannot have, you look at what the Nazis did, you look at what the communist Soviet Union did in terms of freedom of speech, and you'd show me the difference between them. There is none. And it's this self-deluded arrogance which goes like this: I am right, therefore anyone who says something different must therefore be wrong, and by definition, because they are wrong and I am right, their freedom of speech to be wrong doesn't need to be taken into account.
Well, first of all, if you don't have a purpose, let's say, it isn't that your life becomes neutral in a meaningless sense. It's that your life becomes characterized by unbearable suffering, because the baseline condition of life is something like unbearable suffering. And what you have to set against that is a noble and worthwhile purpose. And hopefully your determination of that purpose is buttressed to some degree by the wisdom of the past, because you can't conjure something like that up on your own. And if you provide people with nobility of purpose, then they can tolerate the suffering of existence without becoming entirely corrupted by it. And cultures that don't do that, it isn't even so much that they die, it's that cultures that don't do that are dead. They're done. They don't have a story anymore. They don't have a call to adventure. And then everyone suffers stupidly as a consequence. It's a very bad thing. So Churchill made the same observation that many of the great psychologists and philosophers made in the early part of the 20th century. So bring the story forward and propagate it and make it the most noble possible story. And then you motivate people to transcend themselves, which they need to do. So yes, he's exactly right in his diagnosis. People think of freedom as the ability to implement your whim. And freedom opens up that as a possibility. But sustainable freedom, that isn't what it's about at all. It's primarily about responsibility. It's about determining which load you're going to pick up and carry. That's the proper definition of appropriate freedom. It's not dim gratification of instantaneous impulse. It's self-evident that that doesn't work. 2-year-olds do that. And that's why they can't live in the world. They can't organize themselves across time. They can't sacrifice the moment for the future. And the more sophisticated you get, I suppose, in some sense, the more you're able to do that. And then your freedom becomes the freedom to choose the proper responsibility. And that's also not something that we've been good at communicating to young people. If we talk to them about responsibility, we generally do it in a finger-wagging sort of way. It's like, well, you're breaking the rules, you're a bad person. And well, that may be true because people break the rules and there's no shortage of badness in people. But the proper message for young people is to say, well, no, you don't understand. You want to take on responsibility. You want to take on the heaviest load that you can conceive of, that you might be able to move, because it gives your life nobility and purpose. And that offsets the tragedy. And not only psychologically, not only does it offset it psychologically because you have a purpose and something to wake up for, right, and to face the difficulties of the day, but also because if you face the difficulties of the day properly, you actually ameliorate suffering, not only in the psychological sense, but because you make the world at least a less terrible place. And that's something, right? To move things away from hell is something, even if you're not, self-evidently moving forthrightly to heaven. To move things away from the worst they can be is, well, that's a noble goal in and of itself.
See, people are always talking about freedom, but they're always thinking how to bind themselves to something or somebody. If you're really lost in your life, you're absolutely free, isn't it? No? Freedom is a territory which needs lot of maturing and culturing to handle. Otherwise, people doing compulsive things, they're thinking they're free. These are compulsive things. Somebody is drinking, if you say, why don't you not drink today, you can do it tomorrow. Why don't I have the freedom to drink? No, it's compulsive. If you're calling your compulsiveness as freedom, it's very unfortunate. You lost all your freedom in compulsiveness. So freedom is that kind of a territory where you have to culture yourself, mature yourself to exist free. Everybody, I think at some point, we provide these opportunities for young people to come and just be by yourself. No compulsive talking, no phone, no drink, no nothing, simple. You eat what you want for nourishment and then simply be. Everybody must spend at least a little bit of time like this. only then you understand how compulsive you are. Unfortunately, we are translating compulsiveness as some kind of a goal in our life or freedom in our life. No. See, if you want to get somewhere in your life, get somewhere does not mean be better than somebody, do this, earn this, that, no. As a life, your experience of life should become a fantastic experience. So right now, all the crazy things that people are doing in their life, why? They drink, sexuality, temple, this, meditation, whatever they're doing. Why are they doing? Because they want their experience of life to become pleasant. Yes or no? Somebody hits the bottle, somebody hits somebody else, and somebody does something else, but essentially looking for pleasantness. If your body becomes pleasant, we call this health. I'm talking yoga now to you, officially. If your body becomes pleasant, we call this health. If it becomes very pleasant, we call it pleasure. If your mind becomes pleasant, we call this peace. If it becomes very pleasant, we call it joy. If your emotions become pleasant, we call it love. If it becomes very pleasant, we call it compassion. If your very life energies become pleasant, we call this blissfulness. If it becomes very pleasant, we call it ecstasy. If your surroundings become pleasant, we call this success. Only for this last one, to make our surroundings pleasant, we need the cooperation of many forces around us. Many things have to fall into place. But to keep your body pleasant, mind pleasant, emotion pleasant, your life energies pleasant, it's 100% your business, not good for the business.